I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about Nishida's Metaphysics of Direct Experience. Born in 1870 after the Meiji Restoration, which saw Japan reopen to the world after 250 years of relative isolation, Nishida Kitaro benefited from being schooled in both Eastern and Western philosophy. A great synthesizer of both streams of knowledge, he founded the Kyoto School of Philosophy, where thinkers brought together ideas from both traditions to deliver novel theories of the self and world. In his first book, An Inquiry into the Good, published in 1911, Nishida tells us that philosophy should be an intellectual response to practical demands, where we achieve congruence between our knowledge and our feeling and will. To get to the bottom of things, we need to discard all artificial assumptions, doubt whatever can be doubted, and proceed on the basis of direct and indubitable knowledge, according to Nishida. What are these assumptions that need discarding, and what is this direct and hence indubitable knowledge? One assumption common to science and even to philosophy is that there is an external world and an internal consciousness. To Nishida, this is an unwarranted hypothesis. The sensory stimulus we get from objects, colors, resistance, movement, shape, are not in the things itself, but in our minds. Moreover, what is in our minds seems to be all that we can know of the external world. Yet, even when we interrogate our minds, we do not know the mind itself, but instead only the activity of knowing, feeling, and willing. What we know are the phenomena of consciousness. Such phenomena in pure uninterpreted form are what are direct and indubitable. Prior to thinking about these phenomena, we do not divide them into the phenomena of objects with ourselves as subject conscious of these objects. The experience and the experiencing being are unified. It is only when we judge or recollect the phenomena that we can fall into error, shifting from the intuition of immediate experience to an inference. Immanuel Kant has explained how we can only know phenomena and never noumena. But it's not the aim of metaphysics to get to the noumena, to know reality itself. How can we link the experience of our consciousness and reality? Is it through thought? Both intuition and thinking are activities of consciousness. According to Nishida, intuition is not a passive reception of phenomena presented to consciousness, but a direct judgment of them. Intuition is not merely the data from the stimulation of our senses, because there must be a unifying reality that unifies both subject and object. However, this unifying force is not beyond or above reality, but is immanent in reality. He writes, because the activity of thinking does not go beyond the scope of the phenomena of consciousness, it possesses no mystical ability to intuit a reality above and beyond experience. Assumptions regarding such a reality are abstract concepts formulated so that thinking can systematically organize the facts of direct experience. As far as Nishida is concerned, there is no basis to think that there is a further reality to be found outside the facts of direct experience. Beyond is not the answer, but neither does the answer lie in material facts. Consciousness is what is primary, while the material world is secondary. It is not that consciousness is within the physical body, but that the body is within consciousness, adds Nishida. Like the hypothesis of the transcendent, material phenomena to him are also merely abstractions from phenomena of consciousness. Phenomena of consciousness may seem to be the results of sensory perception, but they in fact arise together. Noumena are not independent of our consciousness and are not what cause phenomena of consciousness. Instead, it is consciousness that causes noumena. There seem to be two types of experiential facts: phenomena of matter and phenomena of consciousness. But Nishida thinks that there is in fact only one, the phenomena of consciousness. Apart from consciousness, there is no noumena to be grasped. Nishida goes so far as to consider noumena as a figment of our imagination, which we invent to help us understand, the way we make abstractions and concepts so as to better comprehend the phenomena of consciousness. When we observe a ball hitting another, all we really have is that event as a phenomena of consciousness. The existence of the two balls is merely an assumption we make in order to explain the phenomenon within our consciousness. Yet Nishida tells us he is not an idealist. He is a non-dualist. It is not that only mind exists, which is the idealist claim, but that there is in fact no distinction between subject and object. Hence, Nishida rejects mind-matter duality. The notions of subject and object, of mind and matter, arise from the demands of thinking, but are merely 2 points of view looking at a single fact. The distinctions are not in the fact itself. For instance, the scientific view of a flower made of atoms is not the complete description of the flower. It fails to capture the beauty of its color or the fragrance of its scent. True reality is not the subject matter of dispassionate knowledge. It is established through our feeling and willing. It is not simply an existence, but something with meaning, he explains. If we take away feelings and the will, then we are left with an abstraction which does not exist. The same way that geometrical constructs such as lines without width or planes without thickness do not actually exist. However, when we communicate, we only convey abstractions. What is intended by the speaker and what is understood by the listener differs because it is necessarily incomplete. The listener also interprets what is said based on his own character and experiences, which differs from the speaker. In pure experience, there is no opposition between subject and object, and no separation of knowledge, feeling, and volition. There is only an independent, self-sufficient, pure activity, writes Nishida. Every phenomenon of consciousness is a function of our intellect, feeling, and will, the will being the fundamental form of consciousness. This means that sensory perception is not merely passive, but already includes active, constructive elements. However, when we begin to divide, reflect, and think, we are separated from pure experience and hence true reality. Words and thoughts do not suffice to convey reality. Nishida writes, "We must realize the true state of this reality with our entire being rather than reflect on it, analyze it, or express it in words." Hence, to know reality is not a matter of cognition but direct intuition. Nishida tells us that it is the artist and not the scholar or the scientist who arrives at the true nature of reality. Artists are the ones who excel at such intuition and are capable of expressing the noumenal reality hidden deep within things. What we intuit is affected by our feelings and will, always containing our individuality. Depending on our mood, the same scenery may appear uplifting or gloomy. Our will, that is, what we are interested in and where we direct our attention, influences our view. We may see a bird as food to eat when we are hungry and disregard how it is a living, breathing creature, capable of suffering pain. To have a complete explanation of reality, we must satisfy intellectual demands as well as the demands of feeling in the will, according to Nishida. Contrary to popular belief, scientific objectivity is not independent of feeling and will, since our inquiry arises fundamentally from the demands of survival. It is why all explanations are anthropomorphic, that is, human-centered, because they are a response to our needs. Nishida argues that it is not only not wrong, it may be the true way of explaining reality. Yet it is not that the individual possesses feeling and the will, but rather that feeling and the will creates the individual, he adds. Feelings and the will are facts of direct experience, and it is direct experience that creates us, and not us creating experiences. Nishida has a theory of perception. Consciousness is always active, even when it seems to be passively perceiving the external world. Perception depends on association and memory to unite the perception to our comprehension of what it is that is perceived. Association and memory are part of consciousness. The so-called objective world is not apart from our phenomena of consciousness. Rather, it consists of these phenomena united by a kind of unifying activity, writes Nishida. This unifier is consciousness or spirit. For two things to be compared, they must have a shared basis of comparison, since otherwise no comparison is possible. There must also be a difference or opposition between the two. He writes, the whole of the entity first appears implicitly, and from it, the content develops through differentiation. When that development ends, the whole of the reality of the entity is actualized and completed. From the initial conception emerge various conceptual links. When the appropriate conceptual union is achieved, the cognitive activity has been completed. According to Nishida, reality is constituted by union and opposition. He explains using examples. When two things are similar except in one respect, that is when they are the most opposed to each other. For instance, the colors of black and white. The union is that they are both colors, and the difference is their hue. For things that have no clear opposition, such as strawberries and rocks, they also do not share much unity. This suggests to Nishida that the most powerful reality is that one that most thoroughly harmonizes and unifies various contradictions. It is when things conflict with one another that they appear clearly in consciousness. In the case of volitional action, for example, when there are no conflicts between motives, there is no consciousness, he writes. Our spirit, the unifying activity of reality, is conscious of itself, not when unity is functioning, but when there is conflict. When we do not have to choose, our will is inactive and hence consciousness is inert. But where do conflicts and contradictions come from? Nishida believes they arise paradoxically from unity. What is unity and what is opposition? Nishida first explains part-whole opposition in relation to unity. The whole is different from its parts, the way a tree is different from its leaves, branches, and roots. The whole is a union of its parts, but is not merely their sum. If we take all the leaves, branches, and roots of a tree and just put them together, they do not form a tree, but are a mere collection of parts. For these parts to become a tree, they must not only be collected together, but unified to form a complete system. Hence, a tree is the opposition and unity of its parts. In its unity, the parts are still existent in their multiplicity. The reality of the tree is a self-development of a single entity, constituting in itself a single system. The parts come together to form a single unified system, which then makes it a whole. If they did not, they would then have remained just parts and not the whole. Next, Nishida explains unity in contradiction. When the will tries to realize an ideal, it does so only because the actual is not ideal. Ideals become distinct in our consciousness when they conflict with reality. When an ideal is achieved, another ideal may arise to challenge it, which then gives rise to a new ideal dialectically. Readers may recognize the Hegelian influence. The self is the unifier of things contrary to the self. Through comparison and a recognition of similarity and differences by the self, it is reconciled and hence unified by the self. It is through conflict that we advance to an even greater unity, he writes, making spirit a developmental process. In reality, the unifier and the unified are or become the same thing. Going further, Nishida writes, "There is no self apart from things. Our self is the very unifier of the universe. The mental unifies what seems to be material. There is only one reality, and the mental and material are simply two sides of one single reality. We can only know the mental contents of consciousness. It is through the mental that the material becomes known, and hence there really is only one side ultimately, with the unifier active in unifying the unified, which is passive. The function of consciousness, of the mind, of spirit, is unification. When we are the unifier, we are active and free, and when we are the thing being unified by another, we are passive and controlled by the law of necessity. The active has a power to unify, and this power is the power of the spirit. What is conscious to consciousness are the contents of consciousness, which are the phenomena of consciousness. However, the activity of unification is unconscious. The activity of unification only comes to our consciousness when we reflect on it, but it is then not the activity itself, but the concept of the activity that is the object of our subjective consciousness. We know this because being conscious of our actions interferes with our actions. Consider the act of breathing. When we are conscious of our breathing, it feels unnatural and controlled. It is only when we stop thinking about it that we just breathe naturally. Noumena are what have been unified by our subjective consciousness because an object, apart from the subject, is a powerless abstract concept. Nishida believes this is borne out by our regular experience of the world. When we encounter things in the world, they have living color and forms and are not the cold concepts as described by science. As opposed to the common conception that science tells us what reality is, what is described by science is to him what is furthest, most abstract and most removed from the true state of reality. The relations between things being reduced to the mechanical laws such as cause and effect offer no deeper explanation, providing only the efficient cause and not the final cause, using Aristotle's terminology. If the aims of science are pursued to their ultimate extent, everything will be reduced to mass and energy, all describable with mechanical laws but devoid of significance or meaning. Human beings will be no different from clods of dirt, according to such thinking. Yet, the real nature we encounter and intuit is nothing at all like such abstractions. Each has its own special characteristics and significance, their own respective individuality. It will be like looking at the statue of Michelangelo's David and seeing only marble with its physical and chemical properties. Not that scientific laws and descriptions are false or not useful, but they simply belong to a different sphere of knowledge. Besides, the mechanical laws, space, time, motion, and other scientific parameters are all also phenomena of consciousness, conceived by our subjective consciousness. They are hence only relatively, not absolutely objective, notes Nishida. Everything in nature has a relationship to the whole, with each thing being a developmental expression of the one unifying self, the way the parts of an animal are integral to the whole animal. If we consider a part divorced from the animal, say its mouth, we will be unable to make sense of what its significance is. Only when there is a unifying self does nature have a goal, take on significance, and become a truly living nature, writes Nishida. We can describe the mouth's weight, shape, color, material ingredients, so much calcium and carbon, but it is only when we realize it is part of a shark that we are able to realize its purpose, which is for feeding. The unifying force in nature is spirit, which actualizes itself in the unifying activity of consciousness, intuited through our senses, intellect, feeling, and will, to give us phenomena of consciousness. Nishida reasons that since spirit is what unifies reality, then reality has spirit in it too, that nature has its own unifying spirit. Non-conscious things such as non-living things, but also living things like plants, are unified from outside and not internally, while conscious beings like animals and human beings are unified internally. The contents of their phenomena of consciousness are expressions of this internal unity. Things that are unified externally to themselves depend on their viewers for their union and hence have no separate reality of their own. Conscious beings, that is, things with spirit, on the other hand, have their own separate reality since they express their unity regardless of external viewers. To really know a thing is to be united with it. When one sees a flower, the self has become the flower, writes Nishida. To be able to act, we need to accord with nature. It is not just our subjectivity, like our opinion or imagination about a thing, that tells us what a thing is, but the merger of subjectivity and objectivity, where we suspend our assumptions and take the phenomena in our consciousness as they are in their objectivity. Our consciousness also seems to have parts divided by time. However, our consciousness from yesterday is united with today's to form one system. Nishida extends this to links between systems so that linked consciousnesses can also be considered as a single consciousness, such as the united consciousness of a society. The spirit of one member of society is like a cell that combines with the other cells to form a whole organism. Each of these cells shares the same foundation of spirit. Together they form a collective social spirit. Extending this yet further, all things are phenomena of consciousness. The myriad things in the universe are the developmental expression of one and the same reality, he writes. Collectively, it all forms a cosmic consciousness. Great deep spirit is the activity of the universe that is united with the truth of the universe, he says. Nishida's metaphysics of direct experience and union has implications for how we should live. The good is unification. Thus we feel pleasure when we achieve unity, which is a completion in our spirit, and we feel pain when we experience disunity. Infinite happiness is within reach when we achieve a union with all of nature. Nishida's vision of reality is not static but developmental. He turns to Heraclitus, the ancient Greek who tells us that all things flow. Heraclitus also says that strife is the father of all things. According to Nishida, when there is only union with no opposition, there is in fact no reality. He writes, "A living thing contains unlimited oppositions and has the ability to give rise to unlimited variation. Spirit is called a living thing because it always includes infinite oppositions and never stops. When it is fixed in a single state and cannot switch to opposing states, it dies. However, since our spirit appears through conflict, there is always suffering in spirit," he adds. This opposition does not come from the outside but internally within reality itself. Because there is a unity at the base of opposition, and because unlimited oppositions inevitably develop from the internal character of reality, true reality is the free development that emerges from the internal necessity of a single unifying factor, he adds. Nishida gives an analogy. Because of the underlying space, which is the unifying factor for geometry, we get a myriad of shapes. Because of the underlying consciousness, which is the unifying factor for all phenomena, we get a myriad of phenomena. These phenomena should be regarded as the development of reality as a whole, a plurality that is unified by consciousness. However, he warns us that we usually hold that there is some agent or activity from which activity rises, but in terms of direct experience, it is the activity that is real. A so-called agent is an abstract concept, and the idea that there is an agent of activity apart from the activity itself comes from thinking that the opposition between the unity and its contents indicates two independent realities. What then is spirit, consciousness, the mind, since Nishida tells us that it is not an agent? Consciousness is the activity of consciousness, and the contents of this activity, and that is all. It has no separate being. What is this underlying being that is unchanging and unifying? It is not time. He writes, time is a form that orders the content of our experience. The content of consciousness must first be able to be joined, be united, and become one in order for the idea of time to arise. Otherwise, we would not be able to link things sequentially and thereby think in terms of time. At the base of consciousness, there is a transcendent, unchanging reality apart from time. While Nishida does not make the argument for space here, the same can be said of space. Space, that is, extension, is hence not the underlying basis either. Neither is it the body, which is yet another phenomenon of consciousness. This power or principle is not transcendent from another reality, but its activities are what establish reality. It does not come from mind or matter, but is that which establishes them. It is independent and self-sustaining, and it does not vary according to time, space, or the person. It does not change under any circumstance, writes Nishida. There is one unity, one reality in the universe, containing a multiplicity that gives rise to opposition, which leads to a higher unity, which leads to further conflict, leading to an infinite activity to unify the universe. Finally, Nishida reveals that the basis, the foundation of the unity of everything, is God. He writes, God is not something that transcends reality. God is the base of reality. God is that which dissolves the distinction between subjectivity and objectivity and unites spirit and nature. God, for Nishida, is immanent and not transcendent. He rejects the idea of a transcendent God as juvenile, one that we cannot achieve intimate unity with since it is not part of this world. He also rejects the materialism of science, where matter is the only reality and that material force is the basis of the universe. Nishida asserts, there is a fundamental spiritual principle at the base of reality, and this principle is God. God is the great spirit of the universe. He rejects the ontological, cosmological, and moral arguments for the existence of God. Instead, he thinks we need to verify God's existence through our direct experience. It is because we can search for the truth of the universe in learning, we can express the true meaning of reality in art, and we can know the foundation of reality that forms the universe in the depth of our hearts, that we can grasp the true face of God. We know God from looking within ourselves, reversing our direction of the vision of our eyes to look inwards, not outwards. If we look to the external world for the proof of God, then he can only remain hypothetical, according to Nishida. We have to seek God in intuition realized in the inner soul. Merely by looking at parts, at things, we cannot see the coherence of the whole. This coherence and unity must instead come from a unifying spirit, just like how, if we look at the individual words of a poem, the single notes of a symphony, or the individual brushstrokes of a piece of art, we cannot recognize the magnificence of the whole and the spirit behind the work. The power of God is active in the universe, just as a painter's spirit is active in a great painting, he adds. Just as we receive pleasure from achieving unity, we want to achieve even greater joy in not just the unity in ourselves, in our society, but even in the world and then in everything. We seek a greater and greater unity, and finally, that absolute unity is God. While Nishida is familiar with Christianity, his meaning of God is certainly not the transcendent God of Christianity or the major theistic religions. He has already made clear that God for him is immanent in the world, and he references Spinoza, who espouses monistic pantheism. Besides, he is a practitioner of Zen Buddhism. Buddhism is often considered non-theistic, and even when it speaks of God, it is more of gods, devas, which are divinities that are non-omnipotent and not almighty, themselves subject to the wheel of life, death, and rebirth. Just like with Spinoza, it seems he is not really talking about God, though in a way he is speaking entirely about God, but perhaps not the common conception of God. This God is not known by revelation, nor even by rational argumentation, since he rejects the ontological, cosmological, and moral arguments for the existence of God. Instead, we are to discover this capital S, spirit, by searching our intuition in our inner soul. He had earlier also explained that the human spirit is not an agent driving the activities of our consciousness, but that all that consciousness is its activity. This is consistent with the Buddhist view of no self, that there is no underlying permanent being and that our sense of self is an illusion. It would then seem that capital S spirit, likewise, is not an agent, but the power of unification in the universe. As he had expressed, unification at the universal level is an infinite process, a dialectical movement not unlike G.W.F. Hegel's, and like Hegel, reaching convergence in the absolute, which Nishida has termed God and Hegel absolute spirit. It is a force implicit in reality that propels the universe towards unity. This force exists because of the naturalistic quest for pleasure or joy and the avoidance of pain or suffering in all beings. Unity brings pleasure, disunity brings pain. This same force operates at the level of the individual and the universe, since it is the activity of consciousness to seek unity. At the level of the individual, it is the individual consciousness, and at the level of the cosmos, the cosmic consciousness. This cosmic consciousness is the union of the collective consciousness of all individual consciousnesses. The same way the spirit of a society is the spirit of its members linked together in a union. This cosmic consciousness will then be nothing but the activity of unification of all phenomena. As Nishida has posited, when one sees a flower, the self has become the flower. To know something is to be united with it, where the subject and object distinction vanishes. Since unification seems to be the good for Nishida, that good is also to know reality, the way of gaining this knowledge being through a union with the cosmos and hence with God. He writes, "There is only one true good, to know the true self. Our true self is the ultimate reality of the universe, and if we know the true self, we not only unite with the good of humankind in general, but also fuse with the essence of the universe and unite with the will of God. And in this, religion and morality are culminated. The method through which we can know the true self and fuse with God is our self-attainment of the power of the union of subject and object." Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.